Brief note, this is a video that's been split into. The first part is on integrating presence, and the second part you're about to see is on innerskill.com. So if you haven't seen the first part, please go back and check that out on integratingpresence.com. Enjoy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you ready to jump into these kind of the high strangeness here?
Yes.
Of
Yeah.
So
The
I'll
high
just
strangeness.
just mention this now. Hopefully this doesn't color or flavor what we're about to talk about too much. But one of the ways my fiance sees the astral plane she calls it the distortion plane. And yeah, and because I think it's highly linked to, I don't know, tell me about your experience, to emotionality.
Okay.
So I don't know. Tell me about your experience with astral work. I don't know. In my, I don't know if I want to talk. I don't know if I feel too comfortable sharing my own experiences around this, but I will say at one time, I just almost spontaneous things were happening around this, and if I was there without consciously choosing to be there, like astral travel or these type of things, it was. I remember it being really vivid, and then side note here. Talks about entering into the astral world and then using that as a springboard to go through that to like the 4D and 5D, or the artificial fourth dimension, artificial fifth dimension. So it's kind of like a barrier. And it's like you're saying it's like a copy, but it's slightly off. That's what I mean. It's kind of slightly distorted.
Yeah.
But I was seeing like this like really rainbow color or phosphorescent neon, like really bizarre. It was almost like a hallucination or something, but I knew it was because I could sit there and I could watch it, and it was like a plant that was plants, like a forest floor, but they were constantly morphing and changing, and they had these iridescent bright colors. And so this was, of course, in a meditative state with my eyes open and can end at any time. But now I don't know where that is. The other thing about the astral is what I find, especially in kind of the new age, it seems to be set up where, okay, in spirituality, you've arrived if you can get to the astral plane. That's it. You see guides and you see, kind of spirits. A lot of the magicians supposedly use this realm for all kinds of things, like whether you're a ritual magician or things like that. And so I don't know how organic this realm is, and then it changes over time and things like this. But and then there's an astral bliss where people get in there and they get all blissed out. So there's a lot of spiritual programs, I would say, and a lot of spiritual control, and that some people just stop there and they think that's it and they can't go any further than the astral plane. But I want to jump into this because I've kind of put that off, and I don't go there a lot because the other times that I did, it seems like you have to talk about like psychic protection, because if you don't know what you're doing with this, I remember that you can get opened up towards attacks and things like this. Because if people do this consciously, they take this layer called the astral body, right, from what I understand, and they have that separate from the physical body. And during that time, if you don't know what you're doing or protected, then something can come in and either take over the body or attack it or influence it. And there's all kinds of, just like anything else, though, there's so many different chances for shenanigans. Now, I will say, though, that there is a lot of potential for spiritual growth and mastery in this. It's just, I would just caution, advise people to really know what they're doing around this and not just take it lightly, like just doing haphazard experiments around it, definitely take it seriously. So what will you say about this, and particularly about any firsthand experiences of crossing over from the dream world into astral, and maybe even vice versa? And the other thing, there's plenty here, but the talking about what is it? We've talked about this before, sleep paralysis, or, I know at one time I was at a point where I could actually enter the dream world, wake up, know that I was in my bed and very relaxed, and I could remember the dream, but then I knew I was awake, and then I chose to go back into the dream and continue the same dream where I left off. So that was probably about as lucid as I got. And okay, I think that's enough for now.
Yeah, that's so I can just share my knowledge I guess my knowledge so far on what I understand the astral plane to be, how to get there, and then the implications of it. So I know of two ways to get to the astral plane. One is when you consciously fall asleep, you go through paralysis. You go through the process of your body shutting off motor control. Can be extremely unpleasant. Oftentimes I've experienced sleep paralysis several times, more than several times, and it's really terrifying at first. There's a couple of theories as to why, but it's just really, really terrifying for many people. But if you can do it, you are able to separate your astral body from your physical body. That's sort of and it can happen in different ways. You can float up. I floated up out of my body to the ceiling fan and then kind of found myself standing next to my bed and saw my body there and everything. You can roll out. You can, there's something I guess called a rope technique. I've never done this before, but you can kind of pull yourself out. Whatever it is, you can find yourself in a state of sleep paralysis and then from there lift out. The other way that I've heard you can do it, which is probably a more attractive way for me, because I was never really good at getting to sleep paralysis, and it would happen kind of spontaneously. It wasn't like I didn't do it intentionally. The other way is to go through a lucid dream, which I mentioned earlier in the podcast. So you can find yourself in a lucid dream, and if you have enough wherewithal and conscious awareness that you realize you're dreaming and you can start to make decisions in that world or that dimension or whatever place, you can say to yourself, I'm going to find, or I'm going to be by my physical body. So let's say you might be in a dream world and you're like, okay, there's a doorway right there. So when I walk through that door, I'll be in my bedroom next to my physical body. Or sometimes people can just sort of, in the dream state, just kind of meditate on that a little bit and feel their physical body and feel where it might be, or kind of feel where that is, or what it might feel like. And they get pulled back into their bedroom next to their physical body. Or you could spawn it by turning around, however you want to do. You want to get it. You want to think about your physical body and get there through some means, a portal, a doorway, remembering it. And when you do, you will automatically cross over into the astral plane. And those are the only two ways I really know how. And from there, what the implications are at that point, like, why would someone want to go into the astral plane versus dream world? My understanding of it is that the astral plane it's a collective place. So a dream is a personal part of your personal unconscious. And you could maybe think of it as like a world of your own imagination. But the astral plane is a plane, or it's a dimension that's shared by humanity. And I've had some clients who are able to go there, two of them in particular, willingly, intentionally go there very freely, almost daily. And they have reported, like what you were saying, like contact with spirit entities, deceased people, spirit guides, And one particular client was interacting with like a past life ex-husband. And what really made that story unique and interesting is that she mentioned that this entity that introduced himself as her past life ex-husband told her that she could verify what she was experiencing by going to the library when she woke up and go into like the microfilm, I guess, where you can go back into like decades ago and look up in, I don't know what year it was, sometime in the 50s. And he directed her to what to look up. And she saw like an obituary and an article of the crash. I guess they were in a car accident and both died. And the picture of him was in this article. So it was like this kind of like empirical validation, I guess you could say, of whom he was. So there's that really like impressed me. It's kind of like got my attention because that's as close to proof as you can get. I mean, assuming she's telling the truth, right? That's as close as you can get to some sort of like validation that this is a real thing or whatever. So spirit guides, entities of deceased people, other entities that are native to the astral plane, it's a different, potentially more spiritual path. I'm not going to say that there's more spiritual. People have plenty of spiritual experiences from the dream world. But from what I understand, the astral plane is part of a spiritual evolution or something where this awareness of this other dimension leads to awareness of other forms of energetic life and potentially offers a glimpse into what happens when you pass away, where you're headed, and the implications of that. And I have heard people talk about how kind of what you were saying in the introduction, like in this intro to astral plane, that there is a certain, like, it doesn't stop there. Like there's different areas you can get to from the astral plane. And I've heard it described in the form of like energy density. And so the density of energy kind of dictates where you are on this spectrum of existence, of energetic existence. And the astral plane is just, I suppose, I guess you could say like a lighter or a less dense energy experience than this physical, because the astral body is less dense than the physical body. So you're kind of separating into it. So what you mentioned about it being like an emotional plane, that's interesting. I never heard of it put that way. And it could shed some unique perspective maybe on that's interesting. She says that because I have read in certain like writings of like yogic practitioners, yogis and like yoga practitioners that, or like basically Hindu practitioners that talk about how when a person dies and they leave their physical body behind, when they're in the astral plane, I believe it's referred to as Kamaloka. I think that's what it's called. It's referred to as astral plane. I think the astral body. See, this is where it can get sort of like you were talking about pros and cons. The cons of this is that the astral body goes into this plane and it's not really attached to the physical anymore. It's just been separated from physical experience, but it's still driven by the ego drives and the ego desires. And so there is maybe that element you were talking about, what she mentioned about it being a lot of emotions or a distortion plane in the sense that it's kind of, if you're talking to someone who's dead, which I've had 7 clients over the past, since 2016, what is it, 8 years about, talk to me about communicating with deceased people. And one caution to this that I've read about from an Eastern perspective is that you don't know if this the astral body is really that person, or if it's the remnants of an ego impression, or if it's been animated by something else.
Yeah, it could. What about an imposter or an
Right.
overlay or deception, a cloaking? It's really to use discernment. And I would just ask, what are the in your own experience with it? What do you have an awareness of how your emotion is similar or different when in the astral, or even your clients? I don't know if you've ever asked them before, or have you noticed when they're doing talking about the astral if there's any difference in emotion or anything like this?
Yeah, the only thing I ever learned or heard about this was that when you're awake or alive, you have a certain containment around your emotional state. Like you can regulate your emotional state. You can contain your drives or your desires or whatever for certain things, temptations, things like the development of and the maturity of the ego could be almost looked at as like gaining some conscious agency over your drives and your desires. When you kind of like when you think when you're really little, like a toddler or something, that's kind of like an unhinged ego. You want everything at instant gratification. And as you get older and you mature and you refine yourself, a big part of the refinement is becoming more discriminatory over what drives you act on and to what degree. So like a lot of religious practices, of course, are about complete mastery over these things because they're so chained or linked to the physical experience that they're very dense in their energies, I guess you could say. And to master them or overcome them means a separation or a freedom from those chains, those things that keep you linked to something physical or dense. So in the astral plane, and I'll try to do my best to explain and kind of how I gained what my understanding is all culminated to be, is if you die with a lot of investment or a lot of attachment to this physical world, your astral body will stay somewhat attached to this realm. So the development of the person or the way that they died has to do with how attached that energy stays to this plane, this physical plane. So if you're like an intuitive or a psychic or somebody that can speak to people that are deceased, those entities, if it's the person that died or if it's some whatever elemental cloaking, like you said, something, they will look for energy from this plane to attach to send messages or to relive experiences. And you could be doing that person a disservice because you're enabling that attachment to this physical plane. Oftentimes, the coup de grace aim of like a psychic is to set these people free, to find out what messages they need to complete so they can cross over.
So, yeah, this is really important. My fiance talks about being a releaser, and so a lot of times these things are attracted to her just because she has the ability to release them too. It's a really good point about people wanting to do psychic readings and things just for their own entertainment, and unfortunately, like in the States, I think they can only give psychic readings under that pretext that it's only for entertainment. But that aside, that's a really good point that they could actually be feeding them to stay here longer. And of course, I guess the astral is where a lot of these disincarnate entities that people call ghost, reside. Yeah. And then you talked a little bit about how this ties into like the greater metaphysical reality. I mean, do you find this as like, about the densities, and a lot of different systems talk about dimensions and densities, and the density of the energy. And I'm reading Journey of Souls now by Michael Newton, and so is there anything else to say about how this might tie into like talk about going to the other side, the other world, in afterlives and things like this? So, but from what I gather, you're is it right? Your interpretation of the astral is kind of just like this thing that's just really close to the human physical experience, and this is where maybe ghosts can get trapped and other things like this. But then there's obviously other things beyond that. And the other thing I wanted to mention here too is about Aboriginals, the culture from right here. They feel, if I'm getting this right, that and I don't know if Aboriginal is the right word for it anymore, in the native people of Australia or whatever. That the dream world is more real than the waking life for them. So it's like the opposite. And I think that's a really interesting notion too.
Yeah, they place a lot of importance on that. Like it's really tricky to say, like, is there a difference between the dream world and the astral plane? People that have been to the astral plane that I've met through my practice and my own personal experiences with being in the astral plane, or what I thought it was, maybe it really wasn't, but it all I can say from a personal perspective and from what they've told me is it feels very different than a dream world. The experience is very different, on a felt sense, on a sensory level. It's just a different place that I've found to be in. It doesn't feel the same. So is it one and the same? Can you cross from one to the other? I've heard some people say that the astral plane is just an extremely lucid dreaming state. Like where, a better way to put it would be that they said that the difference between the dream world and the astral plane is just a matter of conscious awareness, heightened consciousness or awareness, which could be true, I guess, if maybe this method I talked about, finding your physical body to automatically cross to the plane. Maybe there's a certain heightened awareness that happens when you find your physical body from the dream world. What you're talking about with just indigenous tribes all over the world, but like in Australia and like in particular, like also in like South America, where, or cultures or areas where there's more shamanic practice going on, maybe they don't quite delineate between the two as readily, or they see it as more of a continuum or a spectrum of experience, and they have different, whatever it would be, demarcations or categories of those things. Maybe much like what you were talking about with, what did you say, 31 different dimensions in what was it?
Yeah, in the Buddhist cosmology.
Cosmology.
Pretty sure it's 31
yeah.
different realms.
Maybe everybody's kind of in their own language talking about the same thing, because it's all similar human conscious experience, and they're sort of finding or exploring these states of consciousness in their own way in different language. But I don't really know the delineation between the astral and dream. I don't think anybody really truly does. Maybe people that practice this very frequently and go there have like more insight into what the nature of these things are. But
Well, if you want to now maybe get a little personal, you've mentioned before this one incident of a client. Is there anything else worth mentioning about this, and also how it crosses over into your own life?
Yeah. So what put it on my radar was in 2016, I had a client come in. I won't give obviously too much information, but he came in and he was referred initially to the psychiatrist that I was partners with at the time. Same place where I was a neuropsychologist. I worked with a psychiatrist. And he's referred to the psychiatrist for potentially having schizophrenia or schizoaffective or something that was like psychosis related. Because he said that he was talking to people and hearing people talk to him. So he went. He was evaluated. I don't know if the neuropsychologist evaluated him. I just got the referral from the psychiatrist specifically. I can't remember because I had all of his records. I don't remember if he did see I think the neuropsychologist might have referred him to our psychiatrist. I'd have to look back, but all I know, and the important part of it, is that he was not diagnosed with anything psychosis related. And in fact, the psychiatrist said when they tried to put him on something like a tranquilizer or something like Depakote or like a mood stabilizer or an antipsychotic like whatever they are, like Seroquel or something like this, or whatever antipsychotics they tried, it made it worse. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down with the link between anxiety and panic and communication with spirits or entities. It struck me as really interesting that when they tranquilized him, it got worse. And he almost had to keep this kind of hypervigilance and activated sort of state of his nervous system to keep some form of control over it. It was really interesting. Course of treatment. I saw him for probably 4 years or something like that, 4 or 5 years. He came in on a referral, and I thought, okay, he's referred to me because there's nothing going on, like medication wise, nothing we can do. So, he would probably benefit from psychotherapy. I thought, okay. So we started talking, and after about 3 months, he came into session and he said, I don't want to really scare you, or I don't want to freak you out, or, I don't know if this is too personal, but, this woman is becoming to me in my dreams and asking about her son, and her son is you. And I thought, okay. And immediately I had been up to that point open to like the possibility of deceased people discussions. My grandmother had some. So my mother died when I was very young, like 5, almost 6 years old. She died when I was very young. And my grandmother told me stories of seeing her from time to time, a few occasions, pretty vividly seeing her. So it was on my radar. I kind of knew, okay, people can kind of do this. They can communicate with people that are deceased, but nothing extensive. And then he came into my practice and got referred to me. This is 2016. And he said that this woman had been coming to him asking about me. And I paused a bit and I said, okay, so what? I explored it a bit first rather than giving it total credence. I kind of investigated it first. Like, well, what does she look like? I think that's my first question was, what does she look like? And he described her really accurately. And he described her in the same way. This is what kind of clicked for me. He described her in the same way, like what she was wearing and her hair and everything, almost exactly, I think exactly, the way that my grandmother described her 20 some years ago, in her experience. I thought, okay, something like, obviously that's unexplainable to the best. So over time, he started to tell me about these communications he was having with not only her and messages that she was giving me or wanted me to have, but other people. He was almost kind of bombarded by spiritual entities with people that he would meet. And he said something really interesting back then. I just learned this about several months ago. I was reading a book on the astral plane and its inhabitants, which was basically just knowledge taken from Sanskrit, literature, right? But he said back then, like 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I can only talk to and communicate with people that died in vain. Accident, suicide, murder, premature deaths. And that really makes sense in the context of what I recently have learned from an Eastern philosophical or theological lens of like, when you die prematurely by accident or suicide or murder, whatever, the energetic ties you have to this physical plane are much more dense at that age. You haven't lived out long enough in your years for those energy ties or tethers to become less dense to where you can cross over and maybe find another womb more quickly. So what he said back then about only being able to communicate with people that died in vain really lines up with some of the stuff I've been recently reading. And since then, I've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe clients that independently from one another don't know each other at different times over that 8 years tell me that my mother was showing up in their consciousness and their either waking life through messaging, like her voice, or they could see her. A lot of times people see things out of the corner of their either peripheral vision. That's a very common thing I learned talking to people over the years was, not everybody that I've met that's like capable of this. It's on the spectrum. Not everybody could speak with either my mother or someone that else was deceased, but they still would have these kind of paranormal experiences that would always happen in their peripheral vision. And then the core people that were communicating with my mother over the years and other deceased people also confirmed that it often happens in like reflections on windows, on water, out of the corner of their eye. And so I don't know what that means particularly, but it was just a common element. So over these 5 or 6 people, I guess, I learned that there is some communication happening. And then I learned why that might be happening after reading a bit more about, from an Eastern perspective, why it's happening and why that might be dangerous, actually, or I don't know about dangerous, but maybe also a disservice to those people, because unless your intention, unless your intention is to set them free or release them, you may be prolonging their attachment and their pain or suffering.
These are really good points, and I totally agree. It's like, what if the spirit of your mom too is she's trying to be persistent? She doesn't want to let go. What if she's being selfish? Going to all these people to get a message to you. And then this notion of, well, what about charlatans who have somewhat of ability? They see your interview and they know who you are. Oh, Nick, I got the newest message
Right.
from you, and they're not completely sincere or something. And so again, this is where discernment comes in. But there's, I mean, how do we explain that they would, this guy? We just assume, unless he's stalking you or something,
sure,
how he would know this description. And it reminds me of the Matrix too. How, remember, they're putting in this loading program and Morpheus and Neo, and there's like, this is your, I don't know if you said residual self-image. So this is kind of like this ideal image of ourselves that doesn't really age. And so the reason I mentioned this is because I did have a dream after my grandmother died. And I remember her appearing maybe like one of the very first memories I've had of her, not old, but not young either, and she told me to go get back in touch with a mutual friend of ours. I think I've told you this story before. And it's pretty bizarre that she would tell me that. I didn't ask her why, but I did. And I'm really glad I did, and rekindled the friendship there. And so these things, I mean, in my experience, that was through a dream though. Yeah. So, like, what else did you learn about this phenomena? And would it be too much or prying too much to say? Have you asked anyone to help move her on? Or
So I did ask. I did ask some. So the most recent client that was talking to me about her was one client, I would say maybe the one client out of the six that was like that regularly visits the astral plane, like has the ability to cross over very regularly, almost at will. And they said they communicated with my mother a few times. They had pretty good boundaries around it, which I kind of encouraged, because in a therapy setting, it can get muddy as to like the therapy itself. So you have to be kind of careful and gauge the situation as it is, and there's no playbook on that. But I encouraged the boundaries around it for her, just because I didn't want her to feel indebted or obligated or anything like that to do this for me or whatever. That this wasn't her obligation. It just kind of came up so suddenly, like it often does. One thing she said was, my I don't remember this. This kind of like really struck me as odd. She said that I, as a young boy at like 6 years old, or like from when she died until my preteens, I'm assuming like 12 or younger, somewhere in there, some several years or a few years, my mother, I guess, sent her this message that I was communicating with her for a while, maybe in a dream state, I guess, a deep dream state. And then I cut it off before my adolescent years. And so this particular client said to me that my mother is waiting for me to come back to that dimension, that state, to set her free. Because it's a client of mine, I don't know if I feel comfortable having her do that work and collaborating to have her cross her over, right? And I don't know anybody that is as clearly connected in such a concrete way that they would be able to cross her. Or my mother is maybe just like you said, being persistent in wanting to connect with me personally and is waiting for that to happen. And in some way could be not a good thing.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too if she just expects you to have these skills. I think, or figure it out, but maybe we can pick that up some other time off the recording here. You mentioned about the because it does get a little bit it can get a little bit personal where it's not helpful in a larger audience.
That's the existential plight that I'm in, you know. But it's a fascinating one, we'll say. And for people that are listening, or for people that are listening to the story, I guess I hope what they get from it is that I hope to inspire some curiosity or open-mindedness about these things, and maybe not be so afraid to consider it or explore it at least, or consider the impact that it might have on a person's life in general. Or maybe some people listening to this, oftentimes I find this to be the case. Sometimes people listening to this they've written off their own experiences, or they have some of these experiences that they don't really want to vocalize or share. And then I've plenty of times given people permission in therapy, let's say, to do that, to go into that sort of curiosity, and they find they have had these experiences, and it connects them to themselves much better. So maybe if anything, that, like, if people listening have had these things, don't write them off anymore. They could be very real or impactful or something, and it may be a part of why a certain anxiety is there, or a certain,
Well, absolutely. In the context of therapeutic value, just anything, is potential material for, explore for well-being and growth, especially when it comes to dreams as well. I mean, the brief stint I did in therapy, they wanted everything possible about the dream material, It was more of I think she was Freudian trained a little bit, which is interesting. I know Freud gets a really bad rap these days, but there's plenty of contributions there, and it wasn't total Freudian stuff. But now you mentioned, and what I will say though, that the other thing is, though, some people listening to this might have the actual opposite. Like, they're bombarded with this all the time, and so they want to reprieve from it, or they're getting attacked in this, and so they either want to shut it down or have skills in how to protect themselves, know what to do, know what not to do, what things trigger other things, and so you just have to be careful with this. It helps to do a lot of research and take it seriously, use professionals and things like this, and just be careful as well. But it's ripe for, I feel, healing, especially psychologically and mentally, emotionally, growth wise as well. Yeah.
And the importance of grounding yourself and your conscious experience in the physical realm, in our waking life, being grounded in this realm, you could say, and regulated in this realm, helps not only discern those experiences, but can also create some boundaries around when and how they happen.
That's a really good point. I mean, it gives reference points as well, because if we're withholding information from people trying to reach out with a helping hand, and then if you can't really establish these reference points, these boundaries, and what to, and get some guidance and wisdom around it, and some training and mastery as well. You
Yeah.
mentioned about the peripheral, and the one thing that came up, and I have no idea. This is just if there's any validity to it, but I do notice that some people report like psychic abilities, or quote unquote psychic abilities, when there's a lot of extreme danger. And a lot of times our peripheral vision will keep us safe, right? We notice movement, a lot of easier movement right on the peripheral before we kind of see details and things. So things maybe might be blurred or just get bits and pieces. People do scrying through crystals, and these kind of fleeting glimpses, and misperceptions too. The common thing of mistaking something for something it's not, like a rope, mistaking it for a snake, and how our mind and emotions can color our perception, or because perception is not really reliable a lot of times as well. And that's another reason to have someone, to talk to someone about something too, or to have someone to bounce things off when we're getting in this type of inner work as well.
Yeah. There's a really interesting relationship between like the stress response or anxiety or panic and supernatural, paranormal, mystical experiences. It's not always such a consistent relationship, but there is a relationship between the two. And like and vision during stress responses, like you get tunnel vision if you're really stressed out, like peripheral vision may shut down. But if you're in a hypervigilant state, maybe peripheral vision is really open. So like it's a really I've learned people that have or are grappling with these experiences in life often tend to be a bit hypervigilant sometimes, because they're trying to stay aware. It's trying to stay on top of it and trying to control it, trying to not let it get in. And when they meditate or relax or drop into a parasympathetic state, it starts to kind of happen sometimes, and they guard against that. So that could be one way that it kind of manifests itself in life.
Really good points here. And I guess there's only like two other things that I have written down here that I wanted to pick back up on, and we can start winding this down. Have you ever had like REM movement in waking life? I notice sometimes when my nervous system kind of gets overloaded, my eyes will start twitching, or not twitching, because it's different when the eyelid, that's a sign of stress a lot of times, but almost uncontrolled. I notice it really when I sit down to meditate, and then, okay, my body just starts to immediately relax, but I realize my nervous system hasn't caught up with the relaxation of my body. And so sometimes it's almost like my nerves, as they settle down, I don't know if that's like an REM state, or if it's just due to a high, overstimulated nervous system or what. But I don't know
like
if people
your eyes kind of like cicada back and forth quickly.
Yeah, they just kind of move back and forth. But I don't know because if you've ever watched, and this is kind of creepy, if you ever seen somebody sleep in REM state, you can see their eyeballs moving around in these different. And so I guess this is
your ocular muscles don't paralyze.
Oh, wow. That's why some people that are completely paralyzed, paraplegics, they can still move their eyes, right? Well, this is weird. I can move, I don't know if you can see this, this is weird, but I can move my eyes fairly rapidly, consciously like that, which is kind of weird. I don't know if that's a genetic trait or not, because some people can do that. But
it's I know there's a link between like so for example with wild technique with waken initiated lucid dreaming. Part of the process of meditating into a conscious dream state is making sure your eyes are still. So if there's a kind of experiment you can do when you close your eyes and daydream and think about different things, you might notice your eyes move with your thoughts. Your eyes are kind of following the thoughts or the visuals you might have. And so one method, I guess you could, or one technique, is to try to still your eyes by relaxing your ocular muscles so that you can fall asleep quicker. Because when you're in a sort of awake, we'll call it more awake state, a more alert, heightened awareness state, your eye muscles are actively trying to track things. And so if you can relax them, you can go into a pair. So one thing that I do with some of my clients, like I found this to be pretty effective in like maybe de-escalating them if I'm doing trauma work or something. One thing you can do, and it was also, I believe, a hypnosis technique, you just strain your eye muscles a bit by staring at a single point. Like you pick an object to stare at across the room or on your lap or something. And if you fixate your gaze on that single point for maybe 5-7 minutes, your ocular muscles will start to strain and tire, and your eyes will get kind of drowsy and want to close. And that is actually one of the ways I would use if, let's say, talking somebody through a breathing technique or talking someone through a mind-body muscle relaxation technique. If that's not quite working, a gazing technique tends to work really well, and they kind of get a bit drowsy and they kind of fall into sort of a relaxed state. The jaw and the eyes, both muscle groups, are very connected to the sympathetic the autonomic nervous system. And so if you can relax your jaw and your eye muscles, the rest of your body tends to fall into kind of a relaxed state.
It is really helpful too. And I notice when meditating with eyes open, usually the instructions are to find a place at a 45-degree angle, a few feet in front of you, and soften your gaze, right? And then a lot of times I'll notice that, when we get sleepy, the eyes will just naturally want to close. And that's another thing. Yeah. If there's not enough energy in meditation, of course, we want to try to open up the eyes and bring the gaze up a little bit. Now, a candle meditation, the flame of a candle, is a whole technique that a lot of people use. And I've done this too. And there's a whole fire casino technique about working with the after image after the flame. And that's a whole another thing. And then another thing is, just relax even the physical, the ocular muscles. Is that the ones around the eye on the out here as well? That's
like the ocular muscles are inside. So they're like your jaw muscles kind of are like the masseters and the, I think, pterygoids right inside. And then it kind of goes up around here. These are all your jaw muscles, but the ocular muscles are inside, I guess. The muscles that control the movement of your eyeballs.
The eyeballs, I got it.
And so people that work on computers a lot, they frequently recommend take breaks and look with your eyes up and down and left and right and do circles to kind of relax your muscles.
And for me as a nearsighted, to look off into the distance too, because we're all in these enclosed spaces now. Yeah, because we hold a lot of stress around the eye muscles as well. A lot of people.
Oh, sure. If you're straining on screens and stuff, yeah.
Now, the thing we talked about at the beginning, archetypes. Have you done any archetypal work in lucid dreaming? Have you explored these? And even I know that some people look at the tarot, and some people say that's astrally linked as a display of human archetypes. And so. Yeah. What is your work in lucid dreaming with archetypes, be them Jungian, tarot, or anything else?
The only thing I did have like a dream, it wasn't lucid, but it was about a tarot reading done to me in the dream realm, and that happened once or twice, I think. I never really got a chance or haven't worked with archetypes. The only thing that may come close to that for me is I met two dream characters that introduced themselves to me as my dream guides. And they were showing me how to navigate the dream world. They were teaching me how to fly, how to get to certain places in the dream world. So you can, and I don't know, I would assume anybody could, but I just sort of remember that one time it was a female, one time it was a male person introducing themselves to me as a dream guide to help me navigate the dream world. And it was during lucid dreams both times. So I have not really worked with any archetypes or gone that direction with things other than through like dream interpretation, like after I woke up from the dream. So, yeah.
Well, if you want to, and that's another thing, I guess I was misspoken here. When it comes to dream interpretation, do you do your own intuitively? Do you bounce it off friends? Is there a certain guidebook or playbook you use to interpret dreams? Do clients come to you asking what this and that dream means? How do you approach dream interpretation?
My favorite book on dream interpretation is written by Eugene Grendlin. He used to be a professor at University of Chicago, I think, University of Chicago. And he wrote a book called Let Your Body Interpret Your Dreams. And it's a really, really it's my favorite book on on dream interpretation. And he poses all sorts of interesting questions that you can ask yourself and that you can use your kind of like intuitive part of yourself, your gut instincts, your kind of may have like a light bulb moment when you stumble on something that means something to you. But he offers an outline of categories of questions you can ask yourself about the dream you had. And he was a big proponent of getting out of the way of the client to let them interpret it themselves by just probing or prodding with certain questions to guide them in certain types of awareness about what the dream might mean, and then let them come to the conclusion, because your mind will kind of alert you to something that feels right or resonates when it's something that clicks and makes sense.
Well, cool. That's great, because I mean, this whole movement now for embodiment in general is just so amazing, and the body is such a great tool for mind work too. I mean, even the Buddha said you can't really come to full awareness and enlightenment without mindfulness of the body. Yeah, and one thing I notice about dreams is I'm really good at recognizing, or decent, I guess, of day residue. This notion of what we experienced in our waking life that now has a parallel or a correspondence in the dream world.
Yeah.
It's another interesting material to work with.
Yeah, there is like a link there. Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I don't know if anybody's listened to this or watched this long enough. You've noticed that we haven't mentioned my friend's name, and I think we're just going to keep it that way, just due to kind of the personal nature of this. If someone is really compelled to get in touch, just reach out to me, and I'll pass it along to see if can give that information out. But all right, well, thanks. It's been fun, and
really good conversation.